I cried alone for 3 years, while the Korean Mafia boss married my stepsister. In secret, he never knew my father built the ground, his empire stood on the night men feared Kang Seon-jae. I was mopping a floor. I want you to hold that image for a second. Somewhere across the city, hardened men were sitting in dark rooms, deciding whether to breathe or not, based on what his hands did. Somewhere, a table of 12 went silent the moment he walked in. Somewhere, a phone call from him made a man's entire legal team dissolve a deal in under an hour. And I was on the overnight shift at a 24-hour diner on the west side, wearing non-slip shoes, with my hair pinned back under a cap, mopping a floor that smelled like bleach and exhaustion. I had been his wife for 2 years. He didn't know I was at the diner. He thought I was at home. He told people, his people, the ones who moved in shadows and spoke in careful half-sentences, that his wife was a quiet woman, private, unbothered by his world. He said it like it was a compliment, like my silence was something he'd chosen carefully, like a piece of furniture that didn't clash with the room. What he meant was, she asks no questions. What he meant was, she disappears when I need her to. And for 2 years, I did exactly that. I disappeared on cue. I made myself small enough to fit inside the margins of a life that was being written entirely in someone else's name. Because I loved him. God help me, I loved Kang Seon-jae with the specific catastrophic devotion of a woman who has confused intensity for intimacy. He was not gentle. He was precise. He didn't tell me I was beautiful, he told me I was necessary, and at 26 years old I did not yet know that those two things are not the same. I found out about Brianna on a Wednesday, not because he told me. Men like Seon-jae never tell you. They make you find out in ways that feel accidental, the way a surgeon makes an incision look clean. I found out because his phone buzzed on the nightstand while he was in the shower, and the screen lit up with a message that said, "She still doesn't know, right? I can't keep doing this if she's going to find out." I set the phone face down. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. I sat at the table and drank it slowly while he came out of the shower, got dressed, kissed me on the top of my head, the way you kiss a child, the way you kiss something you are fond of but do not see, and left for work. I sat in that kitchen for 3 hours. Then I called my stepsister. Brianna answered on the second ring, laughing at something, her voice bright and easy the way it always was, the way a woman sounds when she has not yet been caught. I said, "Tell me." 2 seconds of silence. Then, "Zora." "Tell me," I said again. "Right now. All of it." Here is what all of it was. 14 months. Not weeks. 14 months, beginning 4 months after our wedding. He had met her at an event I had organised. I had organised it. I had sent the invitations. I had stood in heels for 6 hours making sure everything ran correctly. And within 3 weeks, they were in a hotel room in River North that his assistant had booked under a company alias. She had not felt guilty, she said. She had told herself I didn't really love him, that our marriage was strategic, that I was too self-contained to feel things deeply, self-contained. That was the word she used for the version of me she had needed to build so she could live with what she was doing. The last thing she told me, and I believe this was meant to be comforting, which tells you everything about Brianna Holloway, was, "He said you never really needed him anyway." I hung up. I went to the bathroom. I ran the shower. I got in fully dressed, and I sat on the floor of the tub, and I cried in a way I have not cried before or since. The kind of crying that doesn't make a sound because your body can't coordinate the breath for it. Just water, just shaking, just the complete silent collapse of a woman who had given everything to a man who had appraised her as self-contained. I cried alone in that shower for 40 minutes. Then I got up. I got out. I got changed. And I went back to my shift at the diner. Because here is what I had never told Seon-jae. I needed that job. Not for the money. My father would have given me anything I asked for without blinking. But because the diner was mine, in a way nothing else in that marriage was. It was the one room he had never entered. The 1 hour of the day I was not his quiet woman. The one place where I was simply Zora, who worked hard and smiled at strangers and carried more than she let anyone see. I needed it because somewhere in the part of myself I was still protecting, I knew. I had always known. 6 weeks after that phone call, I learned there had been a courthouse, a suburb I'd never heard of, a marriage certificate with 2 names on it, neither of which was mine. Kang Seon-jae had divorced me in a filing I did not know about, married my stepsister in a ceremony I was not invited to, and moved her into a penthouse he had purchased with a company card. The same week, he sent me a wire transfer for an amount that was generous enough to feel like guilt and small enough to feel like dismissal. No note, just the number. I stared at it for a long time. Then I made one phone call. To my father. Elias Adeyemi did not answer on the first ring. He never did. He was a man who believed that the first ring was for people who were panicking, and that panic was a choice. He answered on the third. He said, Zora, just my name. The way he always said it, like it meant more than a name, like it was the beginning of a sentence he'd been waiting patiently to finish. I told him everything. I spoke for 11 minutes without stopping. I told him about the shower, about the wire transfer, about the words self-contained. I told him about the courthouse and the certificate and the penthouse and the company card. He listened. When I finished, the line was so quiet I could hear the city behind him. His city, the one he had been quietly shaping for 30 years from an office that most people in that city didn't know existed. He said, "Come home. It's time for you to know some things." What I did not know about Kang Seon-jae's empire, what nobody outside of a very specific circle of men knew, was its architecture. 7 years ago, when Seon-jae was building his network from the ground up, he had needed capital and legitimacy at the same moment. He was dangerous enough to command fear, but he was not yet old enough or established enough to command the kind of institutional respect that turned a criminal empire into a legal one. He had found a silent partner, a development group with a 40-year history, impeccable legal standing, and access to licensing structures that could launder an entire organization's finances into something presentable enough for board meetings and city contracts. That group had poured the concrete foundation of everything Seon-jae called his: the licensing, the first headquarters, the hospitality shell companies that gave his holdings cover, the introductions to the city officials who looked the other way, every handshake that had ever mattered, all of it traced back to one source: Elias Adeyemi, my father. Seon-jae had spent 7 years building his empire on my father's foundation, without ever knowing whose daughter slept in his bed. I sat across from my father in his office, dark wood, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a view of the skyline that he had, in part, built, and I said nothing for a very long time. Finally I said, "He doesn't know." My father said, "He has never known." "Why didn't you tell me?" He looked at me the way fathers look at daughters when the answer costs something. "Because you would have left him for the wrong reason," he said. "I needed you to leave him for the right one." I looked at the skyline, at the tower I could see from his window, Seon-jae's tower, the one with his name in the lobby and my father's money in the walls. I said, "What's the right reason?" My father said, "Because you finally understand what you are." The first thing that happened was a letter from my father's legal team to the Kang Group's financial division. A formal notice of review on the original licensing agreement, a clause that had been sitting dormant for 7 years, written by lawyers who had known exactly when it would become relevant. Seon-jae's CFO called my father's office 3 times that day. My father did not take the calls. The second thing was the accounts. The company card Brianna had been living on, the one that paid for the penthouse, the wardrobe, the car, the private dinners where she sat across from my ex-husband and pretended she had built something instead of taken something, was suspended pending the licensing review. I know she called him screaming because a contact at the hotel forwarded me the incident report. The front desk staff heard her yelling from the hallway. The third thing was the penthouse itself, The building, as it turned out, sat on a parcel of land that fell under a development agreement my father had never formally closed. His lawyers filed to exercise the option. Brianna had 48 hours to vacate. She showed up at my apartment, my real apartment, the one only 3 people knew about, which told me exactly which one of those 3 people had told her, with her Chanel bag and her mascara running. And she said, "Zora, you have to help me. This is insane. You're doing this out of spite." I opened my door exactly wide enough to look at her. I said, "I'm not doing anything, Brianna. Business is business." I closed the door. He found me at the restaurant. Of course he did. Kang Seonjae had not become one of the most feared men in the Midwest by failing to locate people who were inconvenient. He walked into the restaurant where I was finishing a closing shift, alone, no security, which meant he wanted this to feel personal. And he sat at the bar and he waited. He was still beautiful. I want to be honest about that because I think women in stories like this are expected to have stopped finding their husbands beautiful the moment they became villains, and that is not how it works. He was still precisely, infuriatingly beautiful. The dark coat, the stillness, the way a room reorganized itself slightly around wherever he chose to stand. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was a problem he had already solved. He said, "Sit with me." I said, "I'm working." He said, "Zora." Just my name. The tone he used when he was not asking. I pulled out a chair. He leaned forward and he talked for 6 minutes about business, about the review, about pressure from a holding group he was trying to identify, about the accounts, about the timing being coordinated in a way that felt personal. He was calm. He was precise. He was the most dangerous man I had ever known, and he was sitting across from me asking for help. And then he said it. "I know you're angry. The divorce was handled badly. I should have, but this, the accounts, the building, all of this pressure. You engineered this, didn't you?" He almost smiled. "You still care," he said. "That's what this is. You're not done with me." The bar had gone quiet, truly quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when a room senses that something is happening that it should not be witness to, but cannot look away from. I looked at Kang Seonjae, this man who had sat across from me at 1,000 dinners and never once asked who I was before he met me, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not anger, not grief, pity. He was so certain, after everything, the review, the suspended accounts, the vacated penthouse, his conclusion was that I was a woman in pain trying to get his attention. His ego was so immovable that power could be dismantling his entire foundation, and he would look at the rubble and see love. I said, very quietly, "Elias Adeyemi is my father." 3 seconds of silence. I watched the certainty leave his face. I watched the calculation begin. All the pieces, all the years, all the introductions and the handshakes and the licensing agreements and the concrete and the capital. I watched him do the math in real time. I watched him arrive at the answer. He said, "That's not possible," I said. "I know. And yet." A man at the end of the bar said to no one, "Oh, she got him." I stood up. I put on my coat. I said, "You told people I was a quiet woman. You thought quiet meant empty." I picked up my bag. "My father built the floor your throne is sitting on. I have been standing next to you for 4 years, and you never once thought to ask who I was." I walked to the door. Behind me, I heard the kind of silence that only happens when a very powerful man realizes, in front of witnesses, that he has been profoundly, catastrophically wrong. I didn't turn around. He came to my office on a Thursday. My office. My name on the door. Elias Adeyemi had announced me to the city's development board the week prior as the new director of strategic holdings for the Adeyemi Group. The announcement had run in 3 trade publications. Seonjae had sent no message. He simply appeared. My assistant, a woman named Camille, who had worked for my father for 12 years and had seen everything twice, came to find me and said, with the specific composure of someone who very much had an opinion, "Mr. Kang is in the lobby." I said, "How many people does he have with him?" He came alone. I thought about that for a moment. Kang Seonjae alone anywhere was either a gesture of vulnerability or a threat so absolute that backup was theatrical. Give him 3 minutes, then show him in. He walked in looking like a man made of restraint, every line of him controlled, every instinct, and I knew from 4 years of marriage that his instincts were extraordinary, carefully managed. He sat. He did not wait to be invited. He said, "Name your terms." I said, "There are no terms." "Everything has terms, Zora. The licensing review will proceed on its legal timeline. My father's attorneys will be in contact. There is nothing personal here." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I want to make this right." And I felt it. The old pull, the one that had kept me mopping floors at 2 a.m., telling myself it was a season, just a season, it would pass. The way his voice went quiet when he meant something. The way he looked at me like I was the only still point in a room full of motion. I let myself feel it for exactly 2 seconds. Then I said, "You cannot make this right, Seonjae. You cannot rebuild something after telling yourself it didn't need tending. You looked at me every day for 4 years and saw a quiet woman. I was never quiet. I was patient. Those are not the same thing." He said nothing. "The difference," I said, "is that patience runs out." The board vote was 7-1. The Kang Group's legacy partnership with the Adeyemi holding structure was formally dissolved, the licensing agreements restructured under new terms that removed Seonjae from the primary table. He retained enough to rebuild, eventually if he was disciplined about it. My father had insisted on that. "We don't destroy people," Elias had said. "We simply stop holding them up." When the result was announced, the board chairman looked across the table at me and said, "Ms. Adeyemi, it appears your family has been patient with this arrangement for quite some time." I said, "We are a patient family." He tried one last time. He came to the parking structure of my building on a Sunday evening, alone again, and I understood now that this was how Seonjae expressed something close to humility. He removed his armor and showed up without witnesses. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping. He looked like a man who had been doing the kind of inventory that comes when everything you built gets examined and you finally have to ask how much of it was yours. He said, "I keep thinking about the beginning, before I ruined it." I said, "I think about the beginning too." He looked at me with something in his face that I recognized, hope, or the memory of it. I said, "I think about who I was. A woman who cried alone on a shower floor for 40 minutes and then went to work. Who sent money to her father's foundation every month under a different name so you'd never trace it back. Who watched you build an empire on a foundation you didn't understand and said nothing because she thought love meant making herself invisible." My voice did not shake. "I am so grateful," I said, "that I will never be her again." He said, "Zora." "Don't," I said, not angry, just final, the way a door is final when it closes and you hear the lock. I got in my car. I drove away. I did not look back once. Director Lim Jun-ho had been at the board announcement. He was not loud. He was not performing. He was simply present in the way certain people are present. Fully, without agenda, without the particular hunger that men in powerful rooms usually wear like a second suit. He found me 3 weeks later through a formal introduction, the kind that requires 3 people vouching and a mutual understanding of what is and is not appropriate. He said, when we met, "I know who your father is. I know what happened this year. I'm not interested in any of it." He paused. "I'm interested in how you talk about the diner." I looked at him. He said, "You mentioned it once in passing, the overnight shift. The way you said it, you sounded more like yourself in that sentence than in anything else you said all evening." Something moved behind my sternum, something that had been very still for a very long time. I said, "I'm not ready." He said, "I'm not asking you to be. I'm just telling you that I see you, Zora. Not the daughter, not the director. not the woman in the story everybody's talking about. He looked at me steadily, seriously, the way Seonjae never had. I see you, he said, and I'd like to, if you'll let me, for a very long time. My father called on the morning after the vote. He doesn't rush to sentiment. He is a man who believes that feelings, like good wine, deserve space before they're poured. He said, "Do you understand now?" I said, "I think so." "Say it," he said. "I need to hear you say it." I looked out the window of my office, at the skyline, at the tower with his money in its walls and another man's name in its lobby. I said, "He was always standing on land that belonged to us. He just didn't know. And I didn't know that I knew." Elias Adeyemi was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very softly, "That's my girl." I am writing this from the 14th floor. The city is below me. The diner is 17 blocks south. I can see the sign if the angle is right. I think about her sometimes, the woman on the shower floor, the woman who made herself small enough to fit inside the margins of someone else's story, who endured in silence and called it love, who cried alone for 3 years because she had been taught somewhere along the way that a woman who needs nothing is easier to respect than a woman who needs things. She was not weak. I want to be very clear about that. She was carrying something extraordinarily heavy in complete silence, the way my father's buildings carry their weight, invisibly, from the foundation up, with nothing showing at the surface. She just didn't yet know that the foundation was hers. Kang Seonjae built his empire on my family's ground and looked at me every day and saw a quiet woman. He never asked who I was before he met me. He never asked what I came from. He never asked what was underneath the stillness. And that, not the betrayal, not the marriage, not the 3 years of silence, that is the thing I will carry longest. Not with bitterness, with something colder than bitterness, with the absolute, unshakable knowledge that the right person will always ask, and the wrong one will always assume. He assumed. Now he knows. Part 2 is coming. Make sure you're subscribed.